The certified letter shook in my hands as I read the number at the bottom. $5,000. $5,000 in fines for hunting on land that was not even part of their jurisdiction. I looked up from the paper to see Corinne Mitchell standing at my property line with that smug smile I had grown to hate. She had her arms crossed like she had just won the lottery. "You have 30 days to pay," she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "And if you continue your little hunting hobby, the fines will double." I stared at her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her clipboard. This woman had declared war on my family tradition. She had no idea what she had just unleashed. Because at that moment, standing there with that ridiculous fine in my hand, I made a decision that would change everything. That is when I realized Corinne had given me the perfect opportunity to destroy her dreams forever. My name is Jake Morrison, and I have been hunting these woods since I was 12 years old. Every morning before dawn, I would slip out of my house, grab my bow from the garage, and make the short walk to the tree line that bordered our neighborhood. The land belonged to Mr. Henderson, an 80-year-old retired farmer who had owned these 300 acres for longer than anyone could remember. Henderson was the kind of man they do not make anymore. Weathered hands, kind eyes, and a handshake that meant something. When I moved into Maple Ridge Estates 15 years ago with my wife Sarah, he was the first person to welcome us to the area. Within a week, he had given me permission to hunt his property. "Just be safe and respectful," he had told me that first day. "The land has been good to me. I trust it will be good to you too." Those words became my guiding principle. I never took more than I needed. I always followed proper safety protocols. I kept my hunting areas clean and left no trace behind. The other neighbors knew about my hunting, and nobody seemed to mind. In fact, several of them would ask me to keep an eye out for deer that were eating their gardens. My hunting routine became sacred to me. Every Saturday and Sunday morning, I would wake up at 4:30, check my equipment, and head into the woods. There was something peaceful about those early hours, the mist rising from the forest floor, the complete silence broken only by the sound of my own breathing, the patience required to wait for the perfect shot. Hunting was not just a hobby for me. It was a connection to my grandfather, who had taught me everything I knew about tracking and patience. It was a way to provide food for my family. Most importantly, it was my escape from the stress of running my small construction business. For 15 years, this routine never changed. I hunted Henderson's land with his blessing. I followed all state regulations. I maintained my licenses and permits. I even took a bow safety course every few years to stay current. Everything was legal, safe, and respectful. The neighborhood was peaceful back then. Maple Ridge Estates was a quiet community of 43 homes, mostly older families who had moved out from the city for more space and privacy. We had a homeowners association, but it was run by reasonable people who focused on basic maintenance and keeping the roads clear. That all changed when Corinne Mitchell moved in. Corinne arrived 3 years ago from downtown with big plans and bigger opinions. She was in her mid-40s, divorced, and seemed to have unlimited time to focus on everyone else's business. Within 6 months of moving in, she had volunteered for the HOA board. Within a year, she was running for president. I should have seen the warning signs. Corinne was the type of person who measured her grass with a ruler and took photos of neighbors' trash cans if they were left out too long. She started small with complaints about mailbox colors and demands for stricter landscaping rules. But I never thought she would come after my hunting. The woods were not even part of the HOA jurisdiction. Henderson's land was completely separate from our neighborhood. What happened on his property had nothing to do with the homeowners association. I was wrong. Corinne Mitchell won the HOA presidency by promising to modernize and elevate our community. She had moved here from a high-end downtown condo and seemed determined to recreate that sterile, controlled environment in our rural neighborhood. Her first act as president was to call a mandatory community meeting. I remember sitting in the community center that night, looking around at my neighbors' confused faces as Corinne outlined her vision for Maple Ridge Estates. "We need to think about property values," she announced from behind the podium she had insisted on having installed. "We need to think about safety. We need to think about what kind of community we want to be." Corinne was an attractive woman, I will give her that. She had perfectly styled blonde hair, expensive clothes, and the kind of confidence that comes from always getting what you want. But there was something cold about her smile, something calculating in the way she looked at people. "I have received several complaints about hunting activities in the area," she continued, her eyes finding mine in the crowd. "Residents are concerned about safety and noise levels during early morning hours." My stomach dropped. I knew exactly what she was talking about, and I knew those complaints had not come from my neighbors. Most of them barely knew I hunted, and those who did had never expressed any concerns. After the meeting, I approached Corinne directly. I wanted to address whatever issues she had heard about and find a reasonable solution. "Mrs. Mitchell," I said, extending my hand, "I think you might be referring to my hunting activities. I would be happy to discuss any concerns you might have." She looked at my hand for a moment before shaking it with the enthusiasm of someone touching a dead fish. "Mr. Morrison, is it?" she said, though I was certain she already knew my name. "Yes, I have heard about your hunting. Several residents have expressed concern about gunshots so close to their homes." "I use a bow," I replied. "There are no gunshots, and I hunt on private property with the landowner's permission." Corinne's smile never wavered, but something shifted in her eyes. "The issue is not just noise, Mr. Morrison. It is about safety and community standards. We have children in this neighborhood, families who moved here for peace and quiet. Having someone running around with weapons in the early morning hours is simply not appropriate for our community." I felt my jaw clench. The land I hunt is not part of our community. It belongs to Mr. Henderson, and I have his written permission. I have been hunting there for 15 years without a single incident. Written permission from an elderly man who may not fully understand the liability issues involved, Corinne shot back. What happens when there is an accident? What happens when property values drop because people find out we have hunters operating right next to our homes? The conversation was going nowhere fast. Corinne had clearly made up her mind before we even started talking. "I hunt safely and legally," I said firmly. "I follow all state regulations and maintain proper licenses. My activities do not affect anyone in this neighborhood." Corinne stepped closer, lowering her voice so only I could hear. "Let me be very clear, Mr. Morrison. This community is changing. We are moving toward higher standards and better property values. Your little hunting hobby does not fit with the direction we are going. I strongly suggest you find somewhere else to pursue your activities." The threat was unmistakable. This was not a discussion or a negotiation. This was Corinne Mitchell drawing a line in the sand. "And if I do not?" I asked. Her smile widened. "Then we will have a problem." I walked away from that conversation knowing that Corinne was not someone who could be reasoned with. She had decided that my hunting was incompatible with her vision for the neighborhood, and she was prepared to do whatever it took to stop me. What I did not realize was how far she was willing to go. The first fine arrived exactly 2 weeks after my conversation with Corinne. $500 for disturbing the peace during restricted hours. I stared at the official HOA letterhead in disbelief. The fine was dated for the previous Saturday morning when I had been hunting on Henderson's property. I called the HOA management company immediately. "This has to be a mistake," I told the clerk who answered the phone. "I was not even on HOA property. I was hunting on private land with permission. I show here that you were cited for activities that disturbed residents during quiet hours," she replied in a bored voice. "Quiet hours are from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. according to your community guidelines." "But I was not in the community," I insisted. "I was on separate private property." "Sir, the citation indicates that your activities could be heard from community property. That falls under our noise ordinance." I hung up the phone and immediately pulled out my copy of the HOA bylaws. I spent the next 3 hours reading through every page, looking for the specific rule Corinne was using against me. There it was, buried in Section 14 under Community Standards and Noise Control. Any activity that could reasonably be expected to disturb residents during designated quiet hours, regardless of the activity's location, could result in fines and penalties. The language was vague enough to be interpreted however Corinne wanted, and she was interpreting it very broadly. I decided to fight the fine through the proper channels. I submitted a formal appeal, including photos of Henderson's property, a copy of his written permission, documentation of my hunting licenses, and statements from neighbors confirming they had never been disturbed by my activities. The appeal was denied within 48 hours. 2 weeks later, another fine arrived, this time for $750 for unsafe storage of hunting equipment. Apparently, keeping my bow in my own garage violated some obscure rule about weapons storage in residential areas. I appealed that fine too, denied. The third fine was for $1,000 for unauthorized use of community access points. Corinne claimed that walking through the neighborhood to reach Henderson's property constituted commercial use of HOA roads. By this point, I had racked up over $2,000 in fines for activities that were completely legal and had been going on without complaint for 15 years. I was angry, frustrated, and starting to feel desperate. I decided to attend the next HOA board meeting to plead my case in person. The meeting was held in the same community center where Corinne had first announced her war on my hunting. I arrived early and took a seat in the front row, hoping to make eye contact with the board members and appeal to their sense of fairness. Corinne called the meeting to order with the same smug confidence she had displayed during our first conversation. The other 4 board members sat silently as she ran through the agenda with military precision. When we reached the section for resident concerns, I stood up. "I would like to address the fines I have received for hunting activities," I said, keeping my voice as calm and respectful as possible. "Mr. Morrison," Corinne replied without looking at me, "your appeals have been reviewed and denied. If you have new information to present, you can submit it in writing according to our established procedures." "I am not presenting new information," I said. "I am asking for common sense. These fines are for activities that do not affect anyone in this community. I am being penalized for legally hunting on private property with permission." One of the other board members, Tom Watson, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Jake," he said quietly, "maybe we could work out some kind of compromise here." Corinne's head snapped toward Tom with laser focus. "There is no compromise when it comes to community safety," she said sharply. "Mr. Morrison has been clearly informed of the rules and has chosen to ignore them. The fines stand." "But Karen," Tom continued, "the man has been hunting that land for 15 years without any problems. Maybe we could adjust the quiet hours or create an exception for—" "The rules apply to everyone equally," Karen cut him off. "We cannot start making exceptions for certain residents just because they have gotten away with breaking the rules in the past." I looked around the room at the other board members. Every single one of them was staring at the table, refusing to make eye contact with either Tom or me. That is when I realized the fix was in. Karen had already secured their support, probably through a combination of intimidation and political maneuvering. This meeting was just theater. The fines would continue, and they would keep escalating until I either gave up hunting or went bankrupt trying to fight them. The fourth fine was the one that broke me. $3,000 for repeated violations of community standards, with a note that future violations would result in doubled penalties. I was now facing over $5,000 in total fines, and Karen showed no signs of stopping. The financial pressure was becoming unbearable. My construction business was doing well, but not well enough to absorb thousands of dollars in bogus HOA fines. Sarah and I had to cancel our vacation and start cutting back on expenses just to manage the mounting penalties. But the money was not even the worst part. The worst part was watching what this conflict was doing to my family. Sarah tried to be supportive, but I could see the stress in her eyes every time another fine arrived. Our teenage daughter Emma started avoiding her friends because she was embarrassed about the neighborhood drama. Even our dog seemed to sense the tension in the house. "Maybe you should just stop hunting for a while," Sarah suggested one evening as we sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by HOA correspondence and legal documents. "Just until this blows over." "This is not going to blow over," I replied, my voice harsher than I intended. "Karen wants to control everything and everyone in this neighborhood. If I give in to her now, she will just find something else to attack next month." "But Jake, we cannot afford to keep fighting these fines. We are going to end up in debt because of this woman's power trip." I knew Sarah was right, but the idea of giving up felt like surrender. This was not just about hunting anymore. This was about whether one person could use bureaucratic bullying to destroy someone's life just because she did not like their hobbies. The breaking point came on a cold Tuesday morning in November. I was getting ready for work when I saw Mr. Henderson walking up my driveway. He looked older than I had ever seen him, his shoulders slumped and his face etched with worry. "Jake," he said when I opened the door, "we need to talk." I invited him in for coffee, but he declined. We stood in my garage, surrounded by my hunting equipment, as he delivered news that hit me like a physical blow. "That woman from your neighborhood came to see me yesterday," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She told me about the fines you have been getting. She said if I do not revoke your hunting permission, she is going to make trouble for me too." My blood ran cold. What kind of trouble? "She said she has been researching my property taxes and land use permits. She thinks there might be violations she could report to the county. She also mentioned something about liability issues if someone gets hurt while hunting on my land." Henderson looked up at me with eyes full of guilt and regret. "Jake, I am 80 years old. I cannot afford legal problems at this stage of my life. My daughter keeps telling me I should sell this place and move into one of those retirement communities. If this woman starts causing trouble with the county, I might not have a choice." I felt like the ground was disappearing beneath my feet. Henderson was not just my hunting partner. He was my friend. He was being threatened because of my conflict with Corinne. "Mr. Henderson," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "you do not have to worry about this. I will handle Corinne. Do not let her bully you." He shook his head sadly. "I am sorry, Jake. I really am. But I think it would be best if you do not hunt on my property anymore, at least until this situation gets resolved." After Henderson left, I sat alone in my garage, staring at my bow and thinking about everything I was losing. 15 years of tradition, my connection to the land, my peace of mind, my family's financial security. Corinne had won. She had used the system to destroy something that meant everything to me, and there was nothing I could do about it. That evening, I was in my home office paying bills when I noticed something in the local newspaper. Henderson's property was being listed for sale. 300 acres of prime hunting and recreational land, priced to sell quickly. I stared at the listing for a long time, my mind racing. Then I noticed something else in the paper. A small article about the HOA's plans for a new community hiking preserve. According to the article, Corinne Mitchell was spearheading an effort to purchase undeveloped land near the neighborhood to create recreational trails for residents. The pieces suddenly clicked together in my mind. This had never been about safety or noise complaints. This had been about Corinne's bigger plan all along. She wanted Henderson's land for her hiking preserve, and my hunting activities were standing in the way. She had systematically destroyed my relationship with Henderson, pressured him into revoking my permission, and now she was positioning herself to buy the land for the community. But as I sat there staring at that real estate listing, a different idea began to form in my mind. An idea that would give me everything I wanted while destroying everything Corinne had worked for. I picked up the phone and called the real estate agent. The next morning, I was sitting in the office of Patricia Williams, the real estate agent handling Henderson's property sale. She was a sharp woman in her 50s who had been selling land in our county for over 20 years. 300 acres is a significant purchase, Mr. Morrison, she said, reviewing the financial documents I had brought with me. Are you sure you understand what you are taking on? I had spent the entire night running numbers with Sarah. It would require liquidating our savings, taking out a substantial loan against our house, and putting my construction business assets up as collateral. It was the biggest financial risk we had ever taken. But it was also the perfect solution to my problem. I understand the commitment, I told Patricia. I have been hunting this land for 15 years. It means everything to me. Well, your offer is competitive, she replied. But I should let you know that there is another interested party, someone representing a local homeowners association. My heart pounded, but I kept my expression neutral. How competitive is their offer? They are offering asking price, but their financing is not as solid as yours. They need approval from their board and have to arrange some kind of special assessment to raise the funds. Your cash offer with quick closing is much more attractive to the seller. I felt a surge of confidence. Corinne was trying to buy the land through the HOA, which meant she had to deal with board approval, community votes, and complex financing arrangements. I was offering my own money with a 30-day closing. What do I need to do to secure this property? I asked. Patricia smiled. Let me make a call to Mr. Henderson. The negotiation took less than a week. Henderson was motivated to sell quickly and avoid any complications. My offer was clean, simple, and guaranteed. The HOA's offer was contingent on multiple approvals and community agreements that could take months to arrange. Henderson accepted my offer on Friday afternoon. I spent the weekend in a state of nervous excitement, barely able to contain what I had done. Sarah was supportive but worried about the financial risk we were taking. Emma thought the whole thing was crazy, but admitted she was impressed that I had outmaneuvered the HOA president. The closing was scheduled for the following Friday. I arranged to take the entire day off work and met Patricia at the title company office at 9 a.m. sharp. As I signed document after document, transferring ownership of 300 acres of prime recreational land to my name, I felt a sense of power I had never experienced before. For the first time in months, I was not the victim in this situation. I was the one making the decisions. The final signature was completed at 11:30 a.m. I walked out of that office as the legal owner of the land that Corinne Mitchell had planned to turn into her community hiking preserve. But I was not done yet. The real satisfaction would come when Corinne discovered what had happened. I drove straight to the property and spent the afternoon walking the boundaries, planning what I was going to do next. The land was beautiful. Rolling hills, dense forest, several natural clearings, and a small creek running through the northern section. It was everything I had always dreamed of owning. By Monday morning, I had contacted a fence company and a sign manufacturer. By Wednesday, the first no trespassing signs were being installed along the property lines. By Friday, a locked gate was in place at the main access point. The access point that the neighborhood hikers had been using for years. I knew it would not take long for someone to notice the changes and report back to Corinne. I was not disappointed. Saturday morning, I was in my garage organizing my hunting equipment when I saw Corinne's white SUV pull up to the gate at the edge of Henderson's property. My property now. She got out of her car and walked up to the gate, clearly expecting it to open as it always had. When she realized it was locked, she stood there for several minutes, reading the no trespassing signs with obvious confusion. Then she saw me watching her from my garage. Even from a distance, I could see the moment when understanding hit her. Her entire body went rigid, and she stared at me with an expression of pure shock. She marched across the street to my house, her face red with anger. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, gesturing toward the locked gate. I walked out of my garage with a calm smile on my face. "Good morning, Corinne. I was wondering when you would notice." "Notice what? What have you done?" "I bought the land," I said simply. "All 300 acres, it is mine now." Corinne's face went through several different expressions in the span of about 10 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally, a kind of desperate panic that I had never seen from her before. "That is impossible," she said, her voice higher than usual. "The HOA is purchasing that property. We have an agreement." "Had an agreement," I corrected. "Mr. Henderson accepted my offer instead. Cash deal, quick closing, no complications." I could see Corinne's mind racing as she tried to process what this meant for her plans. The hiking preserve that was supposed to be her crowning achievement as HOA president had just evaporated. "You cannot do this," she said, though her voice lacked its usual confidence. "The community has been using those trails for years. People have rights." "Actually, they do not," I replied, pulling out a copy of the property deed. "These are private property rights now. No public access, no community trails, no hiking preserve." Corinne snatched the deed from my hands and studied it with the intensity of someone looking for a life preserver on a sinking ship. "This is illegal," she muttered. "There has to be some kind of easement or public access requirement." I had a lawyer review everything before I made the offer, I said. The property is completely private with no public access obligations. The previous owner allowed people to use the trails out of courtesy, but that courtesy dies with the sale. The reality of the situation was finally sinking in. Karen had spent months planning this hiking preserve, probably making promises to other residents and maybe even spending HOA money on feasibility studies or environmental assessments. "What do you want?" she asked, her tone shifting to something that almost sounded like negotiation. "I want to hunt on my own land without being harassed by my HOA," I said. "I want to enjoy my property in peace without being fined for legal activities." "Fine," Karen said quickly. "No more fines. We can call off all the penalties and go back to the way things were before." I shook my head. "Too late for that, Karen. You made this personal when you threatened Mr. Henderson. You turned my life upside down for months because you did not like my hobby. Now you get to learn what it feels like to have your plans destroyed by someone else's decisions." Karen's facade finally cracked completely. The composed, controlling HOA president disappeared, replaced by someone who was genuinely desperate. "Please," she said, "this preserve means everything to the community. Property values will drop if people find out they cannot access the trails anymore. I have already told half the neighborhood about the plans." "Then you better figure out how to explain the change in plans," I replied. "I will pay you," she said, reaching into her purse for her checkbook. "Name your price. I will personally buy the land from you." "Not for sale." "Everyone has a price, Mr. Morrison. What will it take?" I looked at this woman who had made my life miserable for months, who had threatened an 80-year-old man, who had abused her power to settle a personal grudge, and I felt absolutely no sympathy for her situation. "There is no price, Karen. This land is going to remain exactly what it has always been, private hunting property. The only difference is that now I own it, and I do not have to worry about anyone threatening to take it away from me." Karen stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her calculating whether there was any other angle she could work. "The board will not stand for this," she said finally. "We will find a way to force you to allow public access." "The board has no authority over private property that is not part of the HOA," I replied. "And if you want to keep escalating this situation, I should mention that I have documentation of every illegal fine you imposed on me. I wonder how the other homeowners would feel if they knew their president was abusing her power for personal vendettas." That shut her up immediately. Karen understood threats, and she recognized when she had been outmaneuvered. "This is not over," she said, but the words sounded hollow. "Yes, it is," I replied. "It has been over since the moment I signed that deed." Karen walked back to her car in silence. As she drove away, I felt a sense of satisfaction that I had not experienced in months. The hunter had become the hunted, and Karen Mitchell had finally learned what it felt like to be powerless. 6 months have passed since I bought the land, and the ripple effects are still being felt throughout the neighborhood. Karen's hiking preserve never materialized, obviously, and her reputation as the effective HOA president who could get things done has been completely destroyed. The other board members were furious when they learned that Karen had been working on the preserve project without proper authorization and had even started spending HOA money on planning studies. Tom Watson, the board member who had tried to defend me during that disastrous meeting, called for a vote of no confidence. Karen resigned as president rather than face the humiliation of being removed from office. The new HOA leadership reached out to me within a week of taking over, apologizing for the harassment and formally withdrawing all the fines that had been imposed. They even offered to reimburse me for the legal fees I had incurred fighting the citations. I declined the reimbursement. I wanted them to remember what happens when power gets abused. My land has become everything I dreamed it would be. I have been able to expand my hunting activities and even started bringing my nephew out to teach him the traditions my grandfather taught me. The peace and quiet I had been missing for months has returned to my life. But the most satisfying part has been watching how the community has changed. Several of the neighbors who had supported Karen's authoritarian approach have quietly approached me to apologize. They admitted they had gotten caught up in her vision of a more controlled, upscale neighborhood without thinking about what that would mean for individual property rights. Property values have not dropped, despite Karen's dire predictions. If anything, having a large private preserve next to the neighborhood has made the area more attractive to buyers who appreciate privacy and natural space. Mr. Henderson visits the property regularly. I gave him a key to the gate and told him he was welcome anytime. He has been helping me identify the best locations for hunting stands and has shared stories about the land that go back 50 years. "You know, Jake," he told me during one of our walks through the woods, "I was worried about selling to you at first, worried you might develop the land or change it somehow." "Why would I do that?" I asked. "This place is perfect the way it is." "That is exactly what I hoped you would say." The old trail system that neighborhood residents had been using for their hiking is permanently closed now. I had to make that decision to prove a point, but I do not regret it. Karen and her supporters need to understand that actions have consequences. Some of the neighbors have asked if I would consider allowing limited access for serious hikers, and I have been thinking about it. Maybe someday I will work out an arrangement for people who genuinely respect the land and understand that access is a privilege, not a right. But that day is not today. Today, I am sitting in my hunting blind on land that belongs to me, watching the sunrise over trees that no one can take away. My bow is ready, my mind is clear, and my family is free from the harassment that consumed our lives for so many months. Karen Mitchell learned an important lesson about power and consequences. Unfortunately for her, it was a lesson that cost her everything she had worked to build. As for me, I learned that sometimes the best defense against a bully is to change the rules of the game entirely. The hunt continues, but now I am hunting on my own terms.